Erev Tov, everyone. Good evening. It is so good to be with you on this Slichot evening. Dark. That's fun. Spooky Slichot. Okay. I'll keep talking in the dark. I think that's fine. There we go. Bye, Hior. Let there be light. It's a pleasure to get to welcome you in this evening. We're so glad that you are all here. As is our tradition at TBE, we have the opportunity to get to do a little bit of learning together, of setting some intention for moving into our Slichot service, which traditionally is done very, very late at night. We're not going to go quite that late, but when we're spiritually zoned in, we're ready. And so we're really grateful for the opportunity to begin this journey into the High Holy Days with an opportunity to learn, to be inspired, and of course to begin with a familiar ritual of Havdalah. Havdalah means to separate or distinguish, but the remarkable thing about the ritual itself is that it does kind of the opposite of when we think of dividing. We think of like a line that just whoop, right? There's one thing over here and there's one thing over here. But what Havdalah does is to help us move and blend those two parts of time together, to help us move through that liminal space, to help us blend together the sacred and the everyday, Shabbat and the weekday. And as we perform Havdalah together into this year's Slichot, we're mindful of how much we are carrying from this past year into the new year that is about to come within this coming week that we're about to mark. And that we hope not only this ritual of Havdalah, not only this service of Slichot, this opportunity to learn together, will also help us to blend together all the brokenness, the grief, the difficulty, and the joys of this past year with the possibilities of the new year ahead. And so this ritual, our tradition, offers us these tools to help us blend all of these together. And so we bring that intention into Havdalah this evening. How do we hold the brokenness? How do we hold the joy? How do we bring it all into that sense of wholeness that we seek in this year?
So Hannah and I thought we would turn off the lights and go to candlelight, so you do not need to see anything. We're going to listen and be. So Jordy, why don't we move the candle closer to the cantor?
To get us into the Havdalah spirit, if you will, words of Hine El Yeshuati, the intention to separate yourself from fraud and exploitation, being fair and honest with all people, these special Slichot intentions, which we'll lean into a little bit more later this evening. Hine El Yeshuati Eftach Velo Evchad Ki Ozi V'Zimeratya Adonai vayhi li lishua Ushavtem mayim b'sason mimayanei hayeshua Adonai hayeshua alamecha birchatecha selah Adonai tzavaot imanu misgav lanu Elohei Yaakov Selah Adonai tzavaot ashrei adam boteach bach Adonai Hoshia Hamelech Ya'aneinu V'yom koreinu LaYehudim hayta ora v'simcha v'sason v'ikar Kein tihyeh lanu Kos Yeshuot Asa, Uva Hashem Adonai Ekra, Savri.
L'chaim.
Let's move it up a little bit so it's easier for you to sing. Perhaps the rabbi, somebody with a mic will help us, or the cantor will help us with the words so we can all join together. The hesitation was I wasn't sure if everyone knew that here or if it was just in my head that I knew it as a kid growing up, but thank you for singing. Wishing everyone a good week.
Good evening, everyone. It's really, really great to see you. I have been asked to introduce our speakers tonight, and I have to say it's really, really brave of them to let me introduce them, because one of them I have known literally her entire life, and the other one I have known since she's 5 or 6. So these are two amazing women that I have grown up with and who I love very, very dearly. My sister, Dana Snyder, is a clinical mental health counselor. She works for the Dana Group and is the clinical director there. She's also an amazing sister, an amazing cook, an amazing mom, and an amazing friend. She and Jessica Fein, who is the author of the book Breathtaking, grew up together. They were in school together since kindergarten. And my mom worked with Jesse's dad, and our families grew up together. It's just been an amazing, amazing thing that we're still like this close and that Dana and Jesse are this close. I would like to say about Jessie that she is the author of 2 books. This is her second book. And it is a book that tells a story. She'll tell you, you'll hear some of the book, but it tells a story about how we hold together the kind of brokenness that Rabbi Harper was just speaking about. And Jessie has a lot of experience with grief. She is a blogger and a podcaster, and she knows how to lift people's gifts up into the world, and she also knows how to talk to people about what it means to grieve. She's had a lot of loss in her life, and you'll hear from her and you'll see how amazing she is. So about the book, in TBE, our vision statement is all our paths lead to shalom. And the word shalom has many, many different meanings, but one of the ones that resonates with me the most is the idea of bringing opposites together, that you can't have wholeness without the opposites coming together. And our tradition is filled with examples of this. We've got the idea that God is immanent inside of each of us, but God is transcendent, and this sanctuary really is a symbol of that transcendence. In the Musar practice, we hold things like chesed, loving kindness, and at the same time, gevurot, which is wise and sacred boundaries, because we can't channel our loving kindness without some boundaries around it. We keep and study the commentaries of rabbis across time who often disagree with one another, but we read all of them. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, we read, "There's a time for every purpose under heaven. There's a time to reap and a time to sow, a time to keep things and a time to discard them. There's a time to be born and a time to die, and there is a time to weep and a time to laugh." In her amazingly beautiful book, Jessie teaches us that it's not only possible, but it's actually life-affirming to hold joy and sorrow, gladness and grief, all at the same time. And so it is my real pleasure to welcome these 2 amazing women who I love more than life itself to speak to us tonight.
Dana.
There you go.
Okay,
You can put this even right behind you.
perfect.
I was trying to click the wrong thing, so. Hopefully this is going to be the hardest part of this.
Can you move it up just a little bit? Say your name.
Hi. All right. Okay, thank you. Wow. That is loud.
I know, it's,
It feels loud here, it's good out there.
okay. Great. Would you like to start with reading? Is that what we're going to start
That's,
with?
I guess, what we're going to do. So first of all, I just want to thank Allie. That was so beautiful. Thank you. And thank Dana and for inviting me to be part of this beautiful community. I'm so honored to be here with all of you tonight. So thank you, and to share a little bit of my story, which we'll get into, and Dana, in her imminent wisdom, will help us guide the conversation, and I do hope that it's a conversation and that everybody will ask questions and we can speak together. My story is a long and bumpy road through building a family and loving a family and losing a lot of family. And I wanted, given the holiness of this evening and the setting, to share a little bit with you from the book, from a very holy moment in my family's life, which was my daughter Dahlia's bat mitzvah. And it comes closer to the end of the book, so there's a lot of, spoiler alert. My daughter, my husband and I have 3 children, and we adopted all 3 of our children from Guatemala. And our middle child, Dahlia, when she was 5, was diagnosed with an ultra-rare degenerative mitochondrial disease called Murph syndrome. And by the time we got to her bat mitzvah, she had lost quite a bit of functionality. And we had to face the decision of whether or not to go forward with a bat mitzvah that would look so very different from any bat mitzvah we had ever, or bar mitzvah we had ever seen. And so that's the bit I'm going to read to you. And so it's called What She Can Do. In our synagogue, dates for bar and bat mitzvah ceremonies are assigned years in advance, way before your child has stopped squirming in the pews or surreptitiously putting their iPad inside the prayer book during services. You know the exact date your child will become an adult, at least in the eyes of the Jewish world, while they're just getting braces and mastering math facts. We'd known Dahlia's bat mitzvah date for years, but now that the date was approaching, we were more than a little ambivalent. There were practical concerns, of course. Dahlia could no longer speak or read, both crucial skills to saying a blessing over and chanting from the Torah. We also had to consider her extreme fatigue. A 2-hour service followed by an even longer party would definitely result in a major energy crash. But then we remembered how worried we were years before when planning Jonah's bar mitzvah. We'd figured Dahlia would be exhausted and had hired a nurse and an aide to take her home early. As it crept toward the agreed-upon time of her exit, Rob and I watched Dahlia in the center of the dance floor. There she was, beaming from her wheelchair, holding the hands of family members and friends who'd crowded around her, each waiting for a turn to spin and twirl with our seated beauty who was radiating so much joy. We gave the nurse and the aide the rest of the night off and went to join Dahlia on the dance floor. I might have felt a little bad for Jonah since Dahlia was clearly the center of attention and it was, after all, his event, but he was too busy trying to sneak a kiss from Eliana in the photo booth to notice. How could we take another chance for so much happiness away from our daughter? And for that matter, we didn't want to deprive her of the opportunity she so deserved, the chance to take her rightful place in our community. Dahlia would never learn Hebrew, never go to overnight camp or sing Jewish songs, or learn even a single Israeli dance. Yet every time we went to services, Dahlia insisted we sit in the front row so she could hear the music clearly, clap her hands, and let loose with her shoulder dance. Her quiet participation in the music emanating from the bima could rival the loudest gospel choir. There was also what it meant to me. I could still sing my own bat mitzvah portion by heart. I remembered that when my friend Dana's mother saw me shaking before my own service, she did some deep breathing exercises with me to calm me down. I still had the bracelet my mother gave me and the tiny prayer book gifted to me by the synagogue. Dahlia's childhood looked nothing like mine. I wanted one day of overlap, and I wanted the cocktail of nostalgia and pride I'd consumed at Jonah's bar mitzvah. On top of all that, there was the matter of our boys. Depriving Dahlia of a bat mitzvah would have sent them a loud message that Dahlia wasn't equipped for or deserving of the same rites of passage they were entitled to. It would be yet another reminder of her difference, rather than a reassurance of her more important sameness. We scheduled a meeting with a member of the synagogue clergy, Cantor Hollis, to help us think through if and how to give Dahlia a bat mitzvah. Cantor Hollis is one of those people who always makes you feel a little bit better about yourself and about the world for having someone like her in it. When she sings, you understand that if you believed in angels, and if you thought those angels were in the business of singing, this is what their voices would sound like. What should we do, I asked her. How can Dahlia have a bat mitzvah when she can't read or speak and might not even be able to understand what's going on? We did not want to make her a spectacle in any way. I hear you, Cantor Hollis began. Let's think about what Dahlia can do as our starting point rather than focusing on what she can't. Dahlia couldn't chant Torah, but she could push a button on an iPad. Cantor Hollis told us about a program called Gateways that provides Jewish education to kids with all kinds of abilities. We signed up, and every Sunday, Dahlia and I spent the morning in a small classroom with other young teens, some in wheelchairs and diapers, some who were silent like Dahlia, some who could speak, and others who verbalized in their own unique way. The kids had varying cognitive and physical abilities, but they had one thing in common. Every one of them was preparing for an upcoming bar or bat mitzvah ceremony. The teacher, a woman named Rebecca, sat with Dahlia week after week and sang the prayers to her. And on the day of Dahlia's bat mitzvah, when Dahlia pushed the button on her iPad in time for each prayer and reading of a Torah passage, it would be Rebecca's voice that rang out through the sanctuary. And that wasn't all. Dahlia couldn't write a commentary on the weekly Torah reading, but she could sit with Rob as he wrote one, and she could hold his hand while he read it to the congregation. Dahlia couldn't carry the Torah around the perimeter of the synagogue, but Jonah could, and Theo could push Dahlia in her wheelchair beside Jonah as he did so. And there was the most important thing Dahlia could do. She was more than capable of celebrating, of joyously being seen as a full member of her community. Once we decided to throw ourselves into preparing for the bat mitzvah, there was no way I was going to miss the opportunity to make it the most gloriously magical thing Dahlia had ever experienced. The decorative motif was obvious. We transformed the blank canvas of a party room into a bursting field of dahlia flowers. I worked with my friend Susan to envision an obscene abundance of pink and purple dahlias made of construction paper and measured to the exact height of Dahlia's sightline from her wheelchair. A little bit Oz-like, maybe a bit Dr. Seuss-esque, but utterly Dahlia too. The most important thing Cantor Hollis told us is that we find a way to meet Dahlia where she was, so she could have a bat mitzvah that was meaningful to her and honored who she is. And so that's what we prepared to do. We learned yet again that honoring what Dahlia could do was worlds more important than grieving what she couldn't. One day, more than likely, there'd be time for that grieving. But that time wasn't now, and we weren't going to waste a minute of her life grieving prematurely.
Thanks. I just want to start by saying I was at that bat mitzvah, and it was spectacular. It was absolutely beautiful, and Dahlia was beautiful, and you were beautiful. This book means a lot to me. I know all the characters.
Your mother's in it.
My mother's in it. It's an honor to be able to do this with you, and so much fun. I just want to share, the book it's funny and it's sad, and you will laugh and cry throughout the entire book. And you can feel that in the piece that Jesse shared with us. So I want to start with asking you about this idea of commingling sorrow and joy. This is something that I work with clients on all the time, and you can feel more than one feeling at a time. And you've mastered this, Jesse, and I would love to know how you've mastered it, and also how are you able to do that, not only for yourself, but for your family, and particularly for Dahlia?
This is one of my favorite things to talk about because it was not something that was inherently obvious to me by any means. When Dahlia was diagnosed, I decided that I was going to find a cure for mitochondrial disease. Now, just to level set, I am not a doctor, I am not a researcher, I don't have loads of money, and I didn't know what mitochondria were. And still, I was like, okay, this is my role, clearly. This is what parents do. We fix the boo-boos, right? And I did not set about at that moment thinking, we're going to create this joyous home, and no, my mission was clear: find a cure. But that was magical thinking, and it took me a long time to figure that out. And I tried very hard to, I was prepared to travel the world and explore little medicinal plants and create, we were going to be the next Lorenzo's oil. And, we had some hopes along the way and a lot of dashed hopes. And meanwhile, there was Dahlia, wanting to be a kid. She wasn't wanting to be, focused all the time on Googling the next researcher and doing the next thing. And my husband was beautiful at being with her in that moment and her desire to be a kid. And by the way, we had 2 other children in the house, and they wanted to be kids. And so the quest became, how is it that we can create a life of joy and meaning in the midst of the fear and anxiety and anguish and all the other things? And I learned it from Dahlia, because if anybody had reason to be bitter and angry and not want to get out of bed and petrified and all the things, it was her. And yet she wanted to be out there living every day. She wanted to do the most that she could. And more important, she wanted to be exuding this twinkle and this joy that she had in her. And when she did that, other people just gave that right back to her. And we learned that the most ordinary things can become celebratory because, excuse me, because we were following, am I still? Okay. We were following her lead, and so an outing to Target could be a dance party. And there was a victory in doing these things that were so seemingly ordinary. And she wanted to be part of all of it. I mean, even when she could no longer eat, at age 9, she got a feeding tube. She could not take anything orally. She wanted to be in the kitchen where the action was and helping to cook and helping to prepare. And so you didn't need to look any further than her. And she taught me quite a bit in that respect.
She was amazing, and she did sparkle. I mean, she really did sparkle. Yeah. Oh, am I off? Oh, okay. Wow. It's so loud. You started to touch on this, Jess. You are a self-described problem solver, and you're talking about this, in terms of, I am going to solve this problem.
Yeah.
At some point, you came to an acceptance of this is a problem I can't solve.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how did you deal with that, getting to a place of just this is an unsolvable situation?
I'm very comfortable in fix-it mode. It's much more comfortable for me to bring the cheer. And I'll give you an example. My eldest sister, Rachel, had stage 4 lung cancer. And I felt very comfortable trying to be the cheerleader, trying to say, we're going to get through this, and blah, 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 all this stuff. And she had stage 4 lung cancer. And she had to say to me at one point, Jess, please, don't try to solve this. I just need you to be with me in the sadness. And boy, was I grateful that she pointed that out for me, but I was also a little bit ashamed that I hadn't come to that on my own. With Dahlia, it was not that I stopped trying to solve things, it was that what I was trying to solve changed. So I did have to come to terms with the fact that I was not personally going to cure an incurable disease that the most brilliant people in the world who were on her medical team couldn't solve. But there was a lot I could solve. I could figure out how we were going to do that outing to Target. I could figure out how we were going to organize this very complex cast of characters who are involved in her care. I could, make sure that the medicine, the syringe didn't spill all over the place. Sometimes it did spill all over the place, but it became about trying to make things in the moment be what they wanted to be. And there was a lot to do in the moment and not try to be solving something that was not solvable. And my reward for that was feeling like we made it through this day. This was the best day it could have been for Dahlia and the other kids.
Yeah. And we watched a lot of this. I mean, we saw you doing this over and over again. There's something about being a problem solver that helps with anxiety also. You know, it's like if I can be doing something, then maybe I don't have to sit with my sadness. But I think you got to a place where you really were doing both, you know, sitting with the sadness and distracting yourself.
Yeah, and I will say, by the way, on that note, that having help is the best thing in the world. And if you're so blessed to have a best friend who happens to be brilliant at talking you through how to do some of those things, that's a very good thing. But because you're right, anxiety, you know, if you can be sitting in the anxiety or sitting in the fear, and I think we might talk about this, then you don't have to deal with the grief and the sadness. And in that chapter that I read, I said, we're not going to waste a minute grieving prematurely. And that was another thing that I learned. We were going to grieve, and there was a lot to grieve. It wasn't the grief of the loss of Dahlia's life at that point, but there was a lot of ambiguous grief, and I had to learn what that was, and I had to be able to name it so that I could integrate it and move forward with it.
Can you tell us what that is?
Sure. So yeah, you know, at the time, I would, and I still will, say yes, if anybody's going to invite me to something to talk about Dahlia or to raise awareness, I will say yes. And so years ago, I was invited to speak on a panel about ambiguous grief. And I said, of course I'll come. And I hung up the phone and I went to Google, what is ambiguous grief? Because I had pride in myself. I am not going to grieve my daughter while I'm looking at her. And there I read about ambiguous grief, which is different from anticipatory grief, which is, you know, self-explanatory. But ambiguous grief is when we grieve for somebody who is still alive, but either not with us physically, so perhaps they're a prisoner of war, a hostage, you know, or they're not with us mentally, cognitively in the way that they used to be. So for example, we might be talking about dementia, we might be talking about drug addiction. In our case, Dahlia's functionality changed quite a bit. And so there's this idea of ambiguous grief. And when I read about it, and I thought, oh my God, there's a name for this profound sadness, and it's okay. Because once there's a name for it, it feels like you're more permitted to feel it, you know? And then once you name it, you can begin to integrate it and move forward with it. And that's a much healthier way to move forward, at least it was for me.
Well, and that, you talk about also, like, I think this is living with or living in fear.
Yeah. So I wrote a piece about this when COVID hit, because all of a sudden, all these people were living the way we'd been living for a while. And we had the fear and the terror and not knowing who was going to catch what and, you know, wanting to live in a bubble. And so it was this idea that living in fear is really tough for a number of reasons. It might seem like a comfortable place to be, because if you surround yourself with fear and you're inside of it, you feel like, okay, maybe the fear is going to repel the danger when it gets too close. I'm inside of this fear. But you're in it, you're consumed by it, and that takes a lot of energy. Instead, what I learned was to live with the fear, because the fear was not going to go away, but it was also not going to be driving the car, right? And so it was living with it, and sometimes it was going to be louder than other times. Sometimes it was going to be, you know, wanting to be the backseat driver, or, you know, leaning over and elbowing me as the driver. But again, all of these things, learning to name them and then to integrate them, and to learn that it's okay if we are happy, even while the single worst thing that anybody will say, this is the worst thing that can happen to anybody, right? It's your kid. And it's okay to have feelings that are positive alongside that, and I think important, particularly when there were other children involved. Mm-hmm. And we do a number on ourselves where we feel so guilty. Oh my God, did I just laugh? Like, how could I do that, you know?
Yeah.
She could do it, so then.
Right. And that is what is mentioned. I mean, you talk about this so many times throughout the book, and you know, I feel like as a community, we're living through this painful time right now, and yet we're still going through celebrations.
Yes.
and having, joyful moments. And you've really taught us something beautiful in this book, and I think we're all trying to do it.
And look, I mean, it is, we can go back to our own tradition and understand that, if there's a wedding and a funeral, a wedding party and a funeral party, that the wedding is what's going to take priority. We know that the joy is so important, and it's what gives us strength to then deal with all of the sorrow and the hard stuff.
Right, and that idea, the living in or living with, the ability to be able to put the physical and the emotional pieces to the side, to be able to say, I am not encompassed in fear. Like it isn't all of me. I can say, yes, I have fear, but I can place it aside. And I think you've been able to do that really well.
Well, I think that hopefully over the pages of the book, I bring people along with the fact that I wasn't born that way. Like, it definitely was lessons I learned over time. And I think also when you're a parent and such an intense caregiver, Dahlia was incredibly medically complex. From age 9 to 17, she was ventilator dependent, and she couldn't walk or talk or eat. And she required 24/7 eyes-on care from myself, my husband, or a nurse trained specifically in her care. And we had to learn that we are not solely the caregivers. We are the parents, right? We're not just like the medical people, which we became, right? But we also had to just be the parents who were like, reading and baking and giggling and cuddling, and also getting angry sometimes because we were just the parents.
Right. Well, and that kind of leads in, you talk about an experience with understanding all of a sudden, I guess, that you had to be able to be vulnerable in front of your other kids because, well, I'd like you to share
Yes.
about that.
I'm so glad you asked that. And this is so important to me because when people say, do you have any regrets? I have zero regrets about the care that Dahlia received. I know that she had the best medical care, and I know that we gave her the best care we could. But I do have a really big regret, and I like to talk about it because I feel like it might have helped me had I heard this earlier, which is that pretty much as soon as Dahlia was diagnosed at age 5, my husband and I, without discussing it, just both naturally decided that we were going to carry as much of the anguish and fear and all the things as we could for the kids. So we put on a strong front, and there was a lot happening in the house, and they knew a lot of what was going on, but we didn't want them to have to carry any more than they already were because it was heavy. And so one night, I don't remember what year it was, but after we had been at this for some time, our teenager, our eldest, came into our room one night sobbing. There's something wrong with me. And we thought, oh my God, what's going on? What's wrong? Sobbing. I'm so scared and I'm so angry. And I pray and I pray and I pray, and Dahlia's not getting better. But you guys are fine. What's wrong with me? And when we talk about aha moments, most of the time an aha moment is really it's not really a moment, right? It's something that takes a while. This was instant. I was like, oh wow, we have done this the wrong way. Because, we had our eldest and probably our youngest too, thinking there's something wrong with them for feeling these things that were so natural to feel. And it was this realization that if I want to be whole for my kids and my family, I need to let them see where I'm broken. And it was really a pretty immediate change, and something that even now I take very seriously in parenting our 2 kids now, in terms of letting them know when I'm scared or angry or nervous or stressed or whatever, because they need to know that's so normal, and that's how people are, and we move forward. And so that was definitely something that I did not get right out of the gate.
But you found it. You did. And I will say, since I've known you your whole life, you've never been a person who is, you've never come across as fearful or anxious or just, I don't know, Jessie always has her stuff together, and you come across that way, and to be going through something as difficult, and I can only, parts of me can feel this, what it was like, but in that moment to have your child say to you, there's something wrong with me, and then you have that feeling of, oh, wow, I mean, it's intense. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. You talk about Mary Oliver and James Baldwin in this book, yes, and your dad. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit, what do you get from other writers, and maybe these writers in particular?
Yes. I'm a voracious reader, and I read a lot of fiction. I think sometimes we learn more, or I do, from fiction, or also just love the escape. But there are three writers in particular that were so important to me on this journey and that I do talk about in the book. The first is Mary Oliver, and actually it's real short, but I can read to you this one passage from Mary Oliver because I learned a lot from it. And I bet most people know this poem called The Summer Day, and this is just a little bit of it, but she says, I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And Rob read that poem at Dahlia's baby naming. And in fact, I had made it into a poster it's like a collage poster thing that's hanging on the wall, in our living room. But this whole idea of just being present and being in that moment was the biggest thing for me to learn. Again, not trying to fast forward, how am I going to fix it, or what's it going to be like, or, but to just be in that one precious moment. So Mary Oliver meant quite a bit to me. James Baldwin is something, my husband's a high school teacher, and he teaches James Baldwin, and so it's always around, and I read some of it and was blown away, because here you have somebody whose life experience could not on paper be any more different from mine, and yet so much of what he writes about is standing up to tragedy. And in this one passage that I have in the book where he says, so what are you going to do? There's nothing you can do, and yet you have to do something. And he's talking about this character, Bessie. So I picked up my bag and I tried again. And that's kind of how it was every day. You pick up your bag and you try again. And, it's kind of showing, we used to say in my house, we show the trouble who's boss. I think we got it from like a cartoon or something, but it worked for us. And then my dad, my dad was a brilliant writer, and when my first sister Nomi died, my father wrote a memoir about his experience of loss of her, so losing a daughter, and reading that book was really meta in a way, I guess, right? I mean, it was a very interesting experience for me to read about. He had died by this time, so I couldn't talk to him about what I was going through, but I could read all of his thoughts about losing his daughter. And one of the things, he always challenged us to repair the world. That's a really big challenge, right? And this was something that we talked about a lot. And I think reading about his words and his letters to me about that made me realize that repairing the world does not need to be as big a proposition as it sounds at face value, that, each day we were doing our best and we were creating our own little corner of beauty. And it didn't look grand, and probably, from the 10,000-foot view, nobody would think we were saving the world, but we were doing what we could. And so, his writing meant a lot to me and always has.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know you talk a lot about sort of the idea of what we can do for other people, people who are going through anticipatory grief or grieving and how we can help when we're not going through it ourselves.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. And I feel like this is something that we're all going to be grievers. We're all going to, that is the most universal thing. And it should be the great unifier. And it isn't, because we're really uncomfortable with it and we don't know what to say and we don't know what to do. And so often we stay away. And first of all, one of the things that I've been saying about it recently that resonates for me, maybe it will for you, is don't just do something, sit there. And I feel like showing up and not necessarily trying to fix the situation, because you're not going to be able to, and not necessarily trying to cheerlead, but to begin to get comfortable sitting with the sadness and sitting in the uncomfortable and just showing up. Now, another thing is, I'm sure all of us, and I know I have been like, let me know if there's anything I can do. Please, I'm here for you. Please tell me if there's anything I can do. Well, that puts the burden on the person who's going through the thing to come up with what you can do. And there's so many other ways that we can address this. And I know we probably don't have time because I could do we could talk about this all day. So I will just say that, trying to show up, to be specific, to take the initiative, and not to say, I can't imagine. Because that closes down the conversation for the person who's going through it. And there's no way for them to respond in a meaningful way when somebody says, I can't imagine. It's like, okay, all right, and you know what I mean? And the whole idea of empathy, right, is to try to imagine, is to be in that other person's shoes. So there's a lot about it. And I actually, I have this column on Psychology Today called Grace in Grief, and I have an article about that and what to say and what not to say. It is the #1 most read article that I've written on it. But I wanted to just share one story, and I know we're probably coming up on time, but I know that the flowers, and I forget the name of the special flower that you've been doing this program on, Cataniot? Kalaniot. But I just want to say one story about what somebody did for us. And it was one of maybe the most meaningful thing anybody did for us. And it was so quiet and so beautiful. And it continues. We are 2.5 years later now from when Dahlia died. And it continues to give us so much joy. It was a colleague of my husband's, and he came to Shiva one night, and he didn't come into the house. He was kind of walking around outside the house. And, we didn't really notice. I think we were like, well, figured he was uncomfortable. A few weeks later, he shows up one weekend with a truck filled with planting supplies, and he had been scouting out an area, we have a big yard, where he could plant a dahlia garden. And he planted a dahlia garden, which became the beginnings of now this just most glorious garden that my husband has continued to nourish and to grow. And we have dahlias in our house, as long as it's in season. And, it was just such a beautiful gesture. And again, such a quiet one, not something that if he had said, tell me if there's something I can do, we would have ever thought to say, why don't you plant us a dahlia garden, And it might not be feasible for everything, but this idea of something that's going to continue on over time and bring us such beautiful memories.
It was such an amazing gift. I think we're going to take some questions now. We have a microphone walking around.
Thank you so much. I'm curious how your spirituality and our faith has, I don't want to impose, but I was going to say strengthen, but that's opposing. How has it lent to your perspective?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I mean, when we were in the throes of things, I definitely decided that it was time to be praying. It was not, I've always been, my Judaism is just totally core to who I am. It's the context in which I learned what it means to be a human being, but I do not consider myself a religious person. However, I was ready to pray to any entity that I could possibly imagine and to enlist everybody I knew of every other religion because I wanted to make sure we had it covered. But the community was what was important to me. the community and the ritual. So I will say that Dahlia, as I alluded to here, loved going to services because of the music. It was just so joyous and so accessible. So that became really important to us. And then the other thing is the ritual. I mean, I think that I'm like weirdly a huge fan of Shiva. And I think it's really beautiful. Now, the worst day of the year is day 8, right? I mean, that's horrible. But those 7 days, you know, and just the community aspect became very, very important to us. I mean, so many things, not having to think about meals because, of course, there was the meal train or whatever it was, and the group at the shul who was knitting beautiful things for you. Just the way the community comes together, and I think that was never more apparent to me than in those days.
Thank you. Have there been significant advances with regard to Dahlia's illness with your kindness and questioning of?
It's very interesting. I came back last night at midnight from Kansas City, where I was for 48 hours at a rare disease conference. And it was not just for mitochondrial, it was all kinds of rare diseases. Dahlia was one of 6 in the world with her dual diagnosis, so that's really rare. And there was a big piece of me that thought, oh boy, were we just a few years too late? You know, I mean, it was really hard to be listening because there was so much excitement at this conference, and the scientists were speaking, and and so much hope. In fact, the theme of the conference was "There's no place like hope," and there we were in Kansas City, you know. But so I think, there are advancements. I don't think that anything's going to be changing for Dahlia's specific disease. I think that there are just, brilliant people who are working on mitochondrial disease as an umbrella is still rare, but not as, there are many, many, many permutations of it. And I think, it is a very exciting time scientifically for rare disease in general. There's just more attention, more funding that's being given to it. I am going to be around. We have books. If anybody's interested. Oh, more questions. Okay.
Well, I'll ask one more question and then I'll transition us. I know as a community we've been experiencing a large sense of grief in a lot of different forms over the last year as a Jewish community. And I just wonder if you might speak to that for a few moments before we transition.
Yeah, and it's interesting when we talk about this idea of communal grief, right, as compared to individual grief. And I think one of the things, and anybody here, and probably everybody here has experienced grief, it's so isolating. It's like the loneliest thing that there is. And I think that when we talk about what we're going through as a community, we can get our strength from each other. I mean, right, we're all going through this, a lot of these emotions together. And I know just from talking to you about all the things that are happening here in programming and conversations and just, being able to talk about it. Because I think when we're going through individual grief, it's hard to talk about it, and then it's hard for people to listen to. And then there's is it too much? Is it, it's a whole thing. But I think that the communal grief is, definitely a different texture, and I think, like we were talking about before, needs to be balanced, or can be balanced with also the celebrations and the joys. And we see that even when we're watching what's happening. We'll see a family in Israel who's going through it, and we'll see them singing, and we'll see that, and so we witness this all the time.
Hold on, sorry, 1 second before I bring you the...
Thank you. Could you tell us a little bit about your choice of the title of your book? I have a feeling it has many different meanings.
It does. Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Thank you. So it's breathtaking, 2 words, and there are 3 meanings for it. Number 1, as we've talked about, one of the things I needed to learn, and one of my transformations over the course of the book, is learning to slow down. and learning to be in the moment. And so to stop and take those breaths. The second thing is quite literal. My daughter's disease took her breath away. And the third is about the beauty, and it's the beauty that she was for sure, and the beauty that we created. So I loved the way all of those three things, and this is a dahlia, so I was very happy with the way the cover turned out. Thank you for asking that.
Thank you so much for sharing, and when you're talking about vulnerability, for sharing that with us as well. I'm interested about in how are your sons doing? Now, you talked about the oldest sharing that with you, but how have they come through this last?
It's really complicated. They are 22 and 17 now. I will say that my eldest immediately became an EMT after high school. And I think, first of all, they were doing a lot of pretty intense medical care because it was all hands on deck. And did that for about a year, and the trauma of that was just, too intense, right? So, and the little guy, he had a very different journey. He was he and Dahlia were 2 years apart, and she was his big sister, and she mothered him, when he was a baby, and then he was taking care of her, and, he's doing great. He's a high school senior. He doesn't like to talk about it very much, and it's coming. I know it's coming, so we talk about the isolation of grief, and, you can have the experience. And I learned this when my first sister died, that you could lose the same person, and she could even be the same relationship. My sister and I, when we lost our sister, and yet we are going to experience it totally different, not only because she meant something different to us, but who we were to that person goes away when they go away, right? So I think that even though my two other kids both lost the same person and lost their sibling, they are going through it in very individual ways.
Because every relationship is unique. I mean, there's no way to experience it identically to someone else.
Right.
Thank you for coming and sharing your story. But when something like this happens, I shouldn't say I imagine, but it consumes your life and defines you, and it becomes everything. And I'm just wondering at different times if you wanted to separate it and just say, not pretend that it wasn't happening, but just go out and be your own person and not think about.
I love that question very much. And in fact, I worked out of the house the whole time. My husband and I both worked out of the house. And I faced a lot of judgment for that. And I write about that in the book. And what's interesting is my husband didn't. And I was the primary breadwinner. And he did not ever face any overt judgment on the fact that he chose to keep working. And I had people say to me, it's not safe for you to keep working. You should be spending all of your attention taking care of Dahlia. Meanwhile, Dahlia was going to school. It's not even like she was home during the day and I was, But I think that bit of having my own identity was so important and made me a better caregiver. I mean, I have no question, because first of all, I knew how to do that job. I was always trying to figure out what we were doing on the home front, right? But I knew how to do the job that I had been doing for a very long time. Going out of the house and being able to be me, not nurse and therapist and mom and caregiver, blah, 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 made me able to be more focused when I was home. And it reminded me that there was a me before and there would be a me after. And most important, I think it was really important for the other kids and for Dahlia to see, this is not defining every single thing about our lives. We all have our own independent lives too. But I will say it defined everything, at the same time, it was all encompassing, and it is very strange when that ends like that, right? Because spiritually, logistically, physically, mentally, it's the dominating thing. So yeah, there's a lot of identity stuff with it for sure.
Any other questions? Can we have another? If not, if you have other questions, Jessica will be with us in the atrium for a little bit longer. Can we give another round of applause to both Dana and Jessica, and a big thank you. I'm so grateful. I want to share a few words just to transition us and to share what's happening next. And so there's a few things happening. So one is if you have more questions that you wanted to ask, maybe in a smaller setting, we will have books available outside. The book is so beautiful. I really encourage you to get a copy if you don't have it. They're available for purchase. It's after Havdalah, so we can actually sell books. And so those books are available. If you'd like to purchase a book, if you'd like to get a book signed, you're welcome to do so in the atrium. We also have dessert because, of course, we need to feed you here. And then there's something else happening that we're really excited to share with you all tonight, and this is a little bit of a surprise. If you read the invitation this evening, it said that you would have the opportunity to participate in a communal project. It was a little bit mysterious. And as you referred to, there's a project that we're working on in our community that we're launching really on Rosh Hashanah. That is our way of creating a flower garden in our yard as a form of memory, in the same way that your dear friend created that beautiful flower garden of dahlias in your yard. In Israel, it has become a beautiful tradition, a new ritual to create ceramic klaniot. These are anemones. These are a kind of flower that looks almost like poppies that grows in the south of Israel after the rain in the spring. And these flowers are a symbol in Israel of hope and rebirth, and they're a symbol of everything that was lost and everything that we're grieving, everything that we've each lost over the last year, all of the memories that we're holding. And this project started in Israel in a few ceramic studios, but it's actually spread all over the world. And so there's installations of these flowers that have popped up to symbolize new hope, memory, in all kinds of places, next to the Golden Gate Bridge, in London, in all kinds of places all over the world. And these flowers have become that kind of symbol in a communal way. And so this is one of our opportunities to participate in a workshop where you can actually make one of these flowers. And ultimately, we're hoping that everyone in our community will have a chance to create one of these beautiful flowers. And we're going to plant them outside near the Moses statue where we'll be able to see them and hold them in our memory. And so if you would like to make one of these kalaniot, Rabbi Kalman will be leading us in a workshop in the Beit Midrash for the next half hour or so. You'll also have an opportunity to do both. It takes about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how long you want to take. And it's also just a time to kind of talk and process, like you were saying. And so we invite you to do that. Grab a nosh. You do not have to be an artist. Every single step is spelled out for you in such a precise way that anyone truly can do it. So have no fear if you are not someone who's crafty. So with that, I just want to say another thank you. It has truly been so special to work with you both to prepare for this evening. And I do encourage you to get a copy of the book and to have more conversations as well. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the reminder. So 9:15, we'll be back in here for our slichot service, etc. So. All right.